Hello guys, in this video we will talk about runtime environment variables in JavaScript. We will look at what environment variables are, what is .env file and how to use it in your code. We will create env manager class for managing environment variables in your JavaScript project, and finally we will use JavaScript proxy to improve env manager class. Without further ado, let's get started. Environment variables are a set of key value pairs that can be used to store data outside of JavaScript code. This data can be anything from API keys to database credentials. Environment variables are often used to keep sensitive data secret as they are not stored in the code itself. Let's go ahead and take a look at environment variables and how to import them in your code. Environment variables can be imported in your code using process.env object, and I'm in index.ts file of our project. Let's go ahead and create variable hello, and we'll use process.env.hello, and we'll do console log hello variable hello. So let's go ahead and run yarn dev, and we will see if we can get this env variable. As you can see, hello variable is undefined, and there's a good reason for it because we don't have it as an env variable. Let's go ahead and add it to the environment. Let's run again yarn dev. And now, as you can see, our hello variable is getting picked up. As you can imagine, setting environment variables during development can be pretty tedious using the command line. So in order to set your environment variables, you can use the .env file. And we can see here some environment variables that I have defined in the .env file. Secret credentials, like maybe database credentials. So these files should not be committed to the GitHub repository. And right over here, you can see that this .env file is added to the .gitignore. To let other people know what environment variables are for your project, you can use the .env example. And you can see in this .env example file, I'll list an example of the env variables. And this way, your coworkers will know what variables, env variables they can use when cloning and started working on the project. Every time you update your env variables, you put an env variable in this env.example file. It gets committed to the Git repository, and that's how your coworkers know that you have updated this and they need to set their value for the specific env variable. Since .env file is just a text file, these variables need to be added to process.env object. So in order to do that, you can use a .env package, and you simply import this package in your either server.ts or index.ts file, and this package will take the env variables from the .env file and put them in the process.env object. However, I have been using .env CLI package. Let's look at package.json, and in my dev command, I use .env on the command line. Will import the variables from .env file into process.env object, right? And here you can also specify if your env file is different from .env, you can also specify your file. And in order to achieve that, I install .env CLI right over here. And I use it as a dev dependency because when I run my code on a production server, I usually use containers, and then I put in runtime environment variables in that container. So when I'm developing locally, I install .env CLI as a dev package, and when I do my dev command, I run this in the CLI. Let's go ahead and use the port variable from the .env file. Let's go ahead and do yarn dev. As you can see, the port variable gets successfully picked up from the .env file, and it says the API is running on port 3000. Environment variables can be used in the code by accessing process.env object. However, when you have a lot of environment variables, this doesn't scale well. Besides, some variables may have default values, so it is a good practice to use env manager class. So let's take a look how to use it. In the src folder of our project, we create env manager class, and let's put some code in there, right? we're going to be exporting default class called env manager, and we have a public static getConfig method, right? It will take the name of the env variable and then default value. So we're going to return process env.name if it exists. Let's say if process.env.port exists, it's going to return that, or it's going to return default value. So now we're going to put public get node env. We're going to return this .getConfig node env default value, or we can put also as development. So the next command we can do get port, and for the get port we're going to have the same logic. We'll get config, we'll call the getConfig method and pass in port and also the default value, and we're just going to keep going. We're going to define each environment variable that we have in the .env file. So, and we're going to be creating a method for accessing each of these variables. And the method gives us the flexibility of setting the default value and then reusing it in different parts of our program. So let's go ahead and continue. So we're going to go do it for the get port, get DB name, get DB username, get DB password, and that's it. I think that covers all our env variables. Let's go ahead and save this file. And now let's go ahead and instead of using process.env.port, we can say env manager.get port, and it follows the pattern, right? If the variable is called port, it's going to be get port, DB name, get DB name, camel case. And since it's a static method, we should also not forget to put the parentheses to call it. Let's go ahead, save the file, and let's go ahead and run yarn dev command to check if it works. And as you can see, it worked. It picked up the port env variable, and it's saying that API is running on port 3000. Env Manager is a good way to manage your env variables. However, it has one drawback. Every time I add a new variable to my env file, I will have to create a new method to access this env variable. So I'm going to be kind of repeating my code, not exactly, but still a little bit of work. So let's go ahead and improve on env Manager class using a JavaScript proxy. We can delete the previous code for env manager class, and let's go ahead and start a new one, right? So we're going to import a studly case to snake case function from utils.function. And if we go to utils folder, I have functions.ts file, and this is just a helper function, studly case to snake case. It takes the studly case and converts it to the snake case. So if we have DB name, for example, we can just convert it to snake case of the DB underscore name. Now let's go ahead and create again class env manager, and we can create another function that's called DB connection URL, and it's just for demonstration purposes. So what it's doing, it's taking the process.env variables, right, and concatenates it into the URL string. So now we're going to create constant call env manager, and we can instantiate the manager class that we created above. So now let's go ahead and use proxy. We're going to do export default new proxy, and we'll take the env manager. It takes another object, so it has a get function. We can type env manager and the field. And what it's going to do, it's going to return a function with a default value that we'll be passing, and we're going to put string, number, or boolean, right? It can have the type of that. If we have the field in the env manager, so if that method exists, as we created right here, get DB connection URL, right? It's going to call it. So we're going to return env manager field, and we'll pass the default value if there's any that we're passing. But if not, what we're going to do, we're going to create an env variable, and then it's going to be string number or undefined. What it's going to do is going to take the field and it's going to replace the get, because we're going to be doing get, for example, DB connection or get DB port, right? It's going to take out get, and then it's going to convert DB, for example, port to DB underscore port. And now process env can pick it up. Another thing that we're going to be doing is doing the check. We will do env variable, right? If it's true, we can test it and then return true. If it's false, we're going to return false, because when you put env variables in your .env file, it's just a text. right? We don't know whether it's Boolean or not, so we need to make those checks. The next thing, we're going to check if it's a number, and we're going to try to parse it. For example, for the port, right, we'll need a number. So, and then we're going to do parse integer, and we also going to put the radix point. So sometimes people skip it, and but the documentation says that this radix point needs to be in there. And then what we're going to do, we're going to return env variable or default value, and that's it. That's going to complete the code. And let's go ahead and update right here. We made a little mistake, right? We need to put the radix point inside the code right here. Let's go ahead and save it. And now rerun yarn dev to make sure everything is working. And we can see that the port is still running on 3000. So this env manager code works. As you can also see in the database connection, I also defined the get name, get db name, get db username, get db password, host, and port as functions as well on the env manager. Now let's go ahead and check if our code can pick up env variable that it's not in the env file. So let's go ahead and go into index. Let's go ahead and create hello world constant, and we'll do env manager get hello world, and hello world environment variables does not exist in the env file. And let's go ahead and console log hello world. And as you can see, we have undefined. So as we mentioned before, in the code, we put an option that you can put a default variable right here. So we can do hi there. Let's see if that's going to work. Let's save it. And as you can see, there is a hi there. So it does pick up the default value even if env variable is not specified. So let's go ahead and put the value for hello world variable in the env file and see if it's going to override this default value. In the env file, let's create hello world and say we're going to do hi, right? So let's go ahead and save it. In order to pick up the env variable, we need to restart the server. So let's go ahead and do just that. And let's go ahead and run yarn dev and see what we're going to have right now. And as you can see, our hi there is overwritten by hi. So we can use default if the variable does not exist, but if it exists, it's going to get the variable from the .env file or from the environment variable. So let's also go ahead and put get port right here. We can also now set 3000 to be default or 3001 if we want. And this is how the default variables will work with the env manager class. I hope you like this quick introduction to runtime variables in JavaScript. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.